Hello, my name is Lisa Hayward, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the Women's Advisory Board. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. So the purpose of this meeting or our forum is every year we pick a topic, and we focus on various things. Like last year, we looked at transportation in unincorporated King County services. In regards to unincorporated King County, what kind of social services and transportation issues are out there? This focus of this year is on family-friendly working environments and the wage inequity between genders. So we have a distinguished panel, which you will be introduced by Dr. Ellington in a few minutes. So our plan is to gather information. That's what the WAB does. Learn as much as we can about, again, the family-friendly work environments that other organizations and companies provide. We also, we're going to look at discussing what issues are happening with wage inequity. So I'm here just to do a quick introduction to some of our keynote speakers. The first one is King County Executive Office. We're going to have Rhonda Berry speak. She's the King County Chief of Operations, and she's over here. We're also going to have Council Member Rod Dembowski also do a little discussion on the perspective of the council. And then just a quick shout out to our sister commission. It's the Seattle Women's Commission. Morgan Beach is here as well. All right, we'll get started, and Dr. Ellington's going to introduce. Oh, so we're going to have, sorry, I apologize, Rhonda Berry come in.
Thank you, Lisa. I am so happy to be here again to listen to the advisory committee and listen to your discussions this afternoon. Executive Constantine would love to have been able to be here. This is a topic that is near and dear to his heart, and one that's especially important to him now that he's the father of a new young lady, Sabrina, so he does send his regrets. Decades from now, when the children of today are grown up and look back, what will they say of us? Of what we did or failed to do about the inequity of means and opportunity in our society, and about the condition of the planet that we leave them. Those words form the cornerstone of King County Executive Dow Constantine's State of the County speech earlier this year, when he spoke of his priorities for his second term in office, confronting climate change and building equity and opportunity. This forum tonight will help us look at one of those issues, equity and opportunity, and I thank the Women's Advisory Board for opening discussions on the issue of wage equity and family-friendly work environments. At a glance, King County is a great place to live. Median household income is about $71,000, well above the nation. Median life expectancy is nearly 82 years, again, well above the nation. Unemployment is 4.7%, 2 points better than the nation. But inequities across our region exist. Where you live, how much you make, and the color of your skin are major predictors of your chances of living well and thriving. When comparing the 10 zip codes with the highest household incomes to the 10 with the lowest, there is a difference of more than $100,000 in average household income. When we compare the 10 zip codes with the highest life expectancy to the 10 with the lowest, there's a difference of more than 10 years. So we can see that inequities lead to health problems, they lead to lower graduation rates, higher incarceration rates, and lower incomes. So if we fail to address these inequities we find in our region, the impacts only grow more challenging to solve, resulting in a greater cost, both human and economical. Education and employment are key elements to opportunity. Supporting employees to succeed and thrive should be important to any employer. It is important to King County. I am pleased to say that King County as an employer has embraced and has in place many family-friendly human resource policies. We have alternative work schedules, we have telecommuting, part-time jobs, full medical benefits for those working 20 hours a week or more, family and medical leaves, confidential and free Making Life Easier program for help with the challenging family issues that sometimes arise. But what about wage equity and glass ceilings in King County? Our King County Human Resources staff took a look at the issue of wages between genders and found that 2/3 of King County government full-time employees are men. In the middle tiers of King County government, men predominate, primarily sheriff's deputies, jail corrections officers, roads maintenance, and bus drivers. However, in the top tier, the top fifth of our pay range, women are in the majority. And on average, our King County female employees make 99.1% of what our male employees earn. We need to continue addressing this gap, but we are pleased that it's much lower than the national and local gaps in pay between the genders. Tonight's forum gives us a chance to learn more about family-friendly work environments and wage equity across our region, and the ways we can work together to improve equity and opportunity. King County's strategic plan, which is kind of our roadmap for what we do and how we do things in the county, the strategic plan identifies several goals for county government, and 2 of them are particularly applicable to tonight's forum. Our plan promises that we will provide opportunities for all communities and individuals to realize their full potential, and that we will promote robust public engagement that informs, involves, and empowers people and communities. So I want to thank you for hosting this forum. In doing so, you meet your mission of ensuring that the needs, rights, and well-being of women are taken into account by the county, and you help the King County meet our goal to provide opportunities for public engagement with our residents on issues of interest and concern to the community. So on behalf of the executive, I'm going to close by, again, thanking you all for being here and participating in this discussion, and I look forward to hearing your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Appreciate that. And now, Councilmember Rod Dembowski.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you tonight. My name is Rod Dembowski, and I represent District 1 on the King County Council, which is Northeast Seattle, and then all of your North End cities, Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Bothell, Woodinville, and about 1/3 of the city of Kirkland. And I'm fairly new to the council, having been appointed to follow Bob Ferguson in February of last year, and then being elected in the fall for a 4-year term. This year, I've got the pleasure and honor of serving as chair of the Transportation, Economy, and Environment Committee. And you're probably wondering, well, why is that guy here to talk about these issues? First of all, we're spending a lot of time right now on transportation, as you're probably seeing, and I'm optimistic that we're going to get to a good result there that keeps as many of our buses rolling as possible, which has an impact on people's lives, including women. Obviously, if you can't get to the doctor, you can't get to your job, or you can't get to school, that's a real impediment to reducing some of the income inequality or addressing some of the income inequality issues that we're talking about. But one of the main focuses of my committee, we call it the TREE Committee, is on the economy. And when we were doing our reorganization motion earlier this year, I ran an amendment to specifically add to our charter for that committee issues related to pay equity and income disparity. So that was new for the council. No committee had jurisdiction over those issues. We were silent on that. And we added that to the Transportation, Economy, and Environment Committee as one of the areas that we were going to work on this year, and we've done that. We started right away by exploring some of the inequities right here in King County, and the committee has taken up the living wage issue. I'm proud to report that legislation that I drafted, a motion where Dr. Dana Pierce came and testified to, has been adopted, and that adopted a policy here for the very first time that expressly says every employee of King County will be paid a living wage, and every employee of a contractor for King County. It is the policy of this county that they will be paid a living wage. In doing so, we're a little behind the 8 ball there. We joined about 125, 135 other governments around the country that have similar policies. And we're going to do some more work this year on implementing that with respect to an ordinance to follow to spell out the details. But that's work that's going on at King County that the council has initiated in cooperation with the county executive, who has really done excellent work on all of these issues. And Rhonda, I do want to commend him and your office for the excellent leadership that Dow shows on these issues. Prompted by some recent studies, which you are all familiar with and which we see in the paper, talking about disparity issues, we wanted to know how King County was doing, and Rhonda in her remarks made note of that. The good news is that our studies show we are at 99.1% for women of what men earn. That's the top level number. Pretty darn good. Seattle did their study as well, and that's been in the news, and their numbers, for whatever reason, weren't quite as good. 99.1 isn't 100%, which is where we ought to be at a minimum, and we'll get there, but that's not far to go. And so those results were promising, but also they were instructive when we dug down into the numbers. And Rhonda mentioned some of the study results, and we brought with us and handed out to each of you kind of the presentation materials. And there's some great detail in here and some charts that show and illustrate some of what Rhonda was talking about with respect to where the disparities are. And one of the places the disparities are in what you might call traditionally male-dominated fields. For example, a metro transit mechanic, right? Or some of our laborers or our sheriff's deputies. And in those cases, we don't have the presence of women, the numbers in those jobs, and those are pretty good paying jobs. And the result of not having, say, equivalent participation of women in some of those job classes means that your statistics overall can be skewed. We make up for it by having very highly skilled managerial positions filled, in many cases, in most cases, by women, and they're paid more. So, but there is work to do based on these studies in those middle-class job range, in those middle-class jobs that pay good money, family wage jobs for folks to bring home. And the county is undertaking a number of efforts to address that and looking at what are the barriers to access to those positions by women, and really going upstream and investing in recruitment efforts all the way back, say, at the education level, in high school and community colleges, and getting women into the training program so that they're able to take those jobs. Even if, by the way, we've made a decision, a commitment here at the county, even if we don't actually end up hiring them into our government. We've made a decision, and we're going to do more of this, I think you'll see, to invest in those recruitment and training efforts to get women into career paths that pay those living wage jobs, whether we get them here at the county or not, because we think overall that's good policy. So the county is also going through these processes by using our Equal Employment Opportunity / Affirmative Action Plan, EEOAA plan. And the county executive is currently preparing an update to that plan. It's a document that we have. And we are taking special care in the preparation of that plan to look at issues in our policies that affect women and the issues that are a particular challenge to them in the workplace in terms of what we can do to be an even better employer here at King County. We're also looking at our compensation and classification guidelines to make sure that when our female employees are reviewed for compensation and for classification, that there are not barriers or policies that disproportionately impact women that impede their advancement through their career here at the county. So there's a few examples of what we're doing. I want to thank particularly Dr. Dana Pierce, who we're going to hear from later, from the Center for Women's Welfare at the University of Washington. She made a presentation on income inequality in women at our Transportation Economy Environment Committee in March that really helped the King County Council understand these issues. She brought her national research to bear. She brought her wage calculator and presented that, so we knew what it would cost to live here in King County and what an actual living wage is. And I think you're going to get to hear more about that. And it really provided a grounding and foundation that led to the council's adoption of that living wage policy that I mentioned earlier. Another issue I'd like to talk to you about is apprenticeships. I was sitting in my office a month or so ago, or maybe 2 months, and we get a lot of reports. The executive's very busy with reports, usually reports that the council a long time ago in some ordinance or something says, we want to see a report on this. So you guys are sending reports over all the time. And I thought, well, and we try and read them, and this one popped in, and I thought, well, I'm going to pop that report open. I looked at it, and it was on our apprenticeship program. And this is, again, part of the county's commitment to getting folks trained up into living wage jobs. And we use our apprenticeship program for that. And we had a goal of, I don't know what it was, 13,000 hours or something like that. We met our overall hourly goal for all projects in 2013. And these are typically big capital projects over the wastewater treatment division or the solid waste division, or other places throughout the county. We want to have apprentices coming in to learn the trades to be able to make more money. Where we failed, and we're not alone in this, where we failed, in my view, was out of about 280 participants in the program, 280 apprentices, I think 6 were women. Shocking, and it just jumps out at you on the chart. Now, that's pretty bad, in my view. And when you see that, you say, wow, well, something is going on there. Part of what's going on there is just what goes on around the country, and that women traditionally do not enter some of these trades, right? The building trades. There are barriers inherent in the system, right? There are barriers, frankly, in labor that laborers struggle with, and there are more societal barriers. But I asked some questions, and I will say that the executive's office was very responsive. They have undertaken some efforts already to address this that are ongoing, but they put together a paper, and if anyone's interested in it, you could contact my office and be happy to circulate it to you, or Ms. Berry would as well, about kind of outlining an action plan about what we are going to do to make sure that we don't see over the long-term reports continuing to be generated like that. And so I'm optimistic for that work to proceed, and I'm hopeful that we will get the number of women in our apprenticeship programs up, because those jobs, like I say, once you're trained, once you have the skill, once we get you to journey level, you're going to make decent money and good money, and that's a good thing. So looking forward to that work. And let's see, what else can I talk to you about? On Monday, here's an example of putting that into play, just kind of being diligent. We just approved on Monday a solid waste division. We do all the good stuff here at the county. We run the jail, we run the sewers, we prosecute folks with sheriffs, and we take care of the garbage for much of the county. On Monday, we adopted an ordinance which entered us into a contract to rebuild the Factoria transfer station over in Bellevue. It's a $49 million contract. And in our contracts that are of that size, we will typically have what's called a project labor agreement. And the project labor agreement will have goals for participation by minorities and women in these apprenticeship programs. And we haven't done necessarily, and they're goals, they're not mandates, but we haven't done a very good job of checking to see always how we do. All right, you put the goals in there, but when you get to the end of the project, maybe you got there, maybe you didn't. So I ran an amendment, and we handed that out too for those of you who are interested in legislation, that said, look, about a third of the way into this project, it's going to be about a 3-year project, we want a report that says how are we doing on this particular project in terms of getting women and people of color into the apprenticeship and training programs on this particular project. And what that will allow us to do is then be more proactive with the contractor, engage in new strategies on that project if necessary to make sure we achieve the goals that are in the project labor agreement. Then we're going to have a second report at the end of the project to see how we did. So we're going to get information as a result of this amendment, and the other thing it does is it shines a light on our contractor, and it shines a light on our solid waste division that says, we care. These are not just numbers we're putting in that we want you to kind of make an effort at doing. We really care about this, and we want you to use your best efforts to achieve these goals. We're serious, and we're watching. The King County Council and the county executive are watching. I hope then, once we get that information on this particular project, to be able to strengthen those goals, make them requirements where we can, expand and incorporate the strategies we use to achieve them on other projects. We're going to build another transfer station. These are big projects. These are good job opportunities down in South King County, and this county will continue to build capital projects, for as long as we're in business. So there's a few examples of some of the things we're doing. I know your focus this year is on income inequality and opportunities, and it is the hot topic. We're very excited to be doing it at the county right now. I want to just acknowledge and thank a couple of friends, Liz, Vivian in the room, and Meryl Cousin, who I've really enjoyed working with both of you on these issues, and welcome to do that. I look forward to doing that more in the future. And then, if I can, one non-economic thing. The county runs a series of health clinics. We have one of the biggest health departments in the country. We own Harborview Hospital, where the University of Washington contracts. Last year, the Attorney General came out with an opinion, Attorney General's opinion, on Initiative 120. That was an initiative protecting women's reproductive rights in the state of Washington many years ago. But the Attorney General's opinion was new, and it said if you are going to provide, in essence, health care, you've got to provide reproductive health care. You've got to provide the full range of opportunities or the full range of services. And I took some steps then, and we're going to continue to do this. I'm on the contract renegotiation team for the University of Washington Harborview Hospital contract to make sure that as we enter into agreements with other hospitals, particularly hospitals run by churches, that we ensure that with respect to the county's role in healthcare and healthcare for women, that their rights under Washington state law and Initiative 120 in particular, as interpreted by the Attorney General's opinion, are going to be protected, and they're not going to be put at risk or reduced, or we're going to, or have barriers to access. And so I wanted to note that before. I know it's not your hot topic, but maybe it will be next year. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight. There's lots of other things we're working on there. If I can be helpful, other than keeping your bus running, please give a call. Please give a call, and I appreciate the chance to work with any of you on any of these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Dembowski. So tonight, I have the privilege to facilitate our forum and our panel discussion, but we're going to start with a presentation by Dr. Diana Pierce, who's widely recognized for coining the phrase, the feminization of poverty. Diana Pierce received her PhD in sociology and social work from the University of Michigan and is currently on the faculty of the University of Washington School of Social Work. Her areas of expertise include low-wage and part-time employment, unemployment insurance, homelessness, and welfare reform as they impact women. She created the Self-Sufficiency Standard, a measure of income adequacy, which is now calculated for 37 states and cities, and has done related analysis, research, and web tools that are based on that standard. Dr. Pierce is also the founder and director of the Center for Women's Welfare at the University of Washington. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Diana Pierce.
I don't know, have to work it. Is it coming up? See it a little bit better. Oh, great. Sorry. Okay. Can you see that okay? Yeah. Because the TV, they said I couldn't turn the lights off completely. So I'm going to talk about a number of things today. So I'm going to talk about, first, the perfect storm of bad economic trends, rising income inequality, especially recently, especially here, rising costs and declining supports, work supports and subsidies. There's some good news, the ACA and the $15 an hour, especially for women, but achieving wage equity has got challenges. We're stuck at 77%. So here is just a little graphic about I'm going to give some context here with what's happened to the income inequality. So you can see in the top row of flowers that between 1947 and 79, income grew pretty evenly across all of the quintiles, the bottom 20%, second, et cetera, even the top 5%. But then 1979 to 2008, the bottom 20% actually lost income, went down 7%. The top 5% up 73%, and then you can see the tree on the side, the top 1%, 224%. I like this graphic because it seems so clear about what's happening. And in the United States, the percent growth in income If you do it between the 99% and the top 1%, you can see that it grew a lot more for the top 1%. In Washington State, it's even a little worse, because instead of 201%, it's 222%, and the other 99%, only 14%. And if we look at what's happened just since the end of the recession, and we started the recovery in 2009, in the 3 years since then, in the United States, 95% of those income gains went to the top 1%. In Washington State, it's 100%. Of all the income gains in Washington State since 2009 have gone to the top 1%. What this means for the middle is that it's mean a loss of middle and high wage jobs. So one of the things that happened was that lower wage occupations were 21% of the jobs lost in the recession, but 58% of those gained. And then the opposite, for mid-wage jobs, they were 60% of the loss, but only 22% of the recovery. So we're seeing a switch from higher mid-wage jobs to lower wage jobs. The percentage that were high wage stayed the same. That means that rising inequality imposed a tax of 27% on the middle fifth. So if we hadn't had that rise in income inequality, incomes of people in the middle quintile would be 27% higher. So for those on the bottom, this means a crunch as productivity rises, but wages stagnate. And I'm sure some of you have seen some of this. If you've seen Inequality for All, he talks about this. So up until the mid-70s, as productivity increased, so did wages, and then they just stopped. So the gains from that increase in productivity, which keeps on increasing, has gone to the 1%. So this is kind of the why of how the 1% keeps getting richer and richer, even though people are working harder and are more productive. At the same time, the cost of living rises faster than wages. So in Washington State, I'll explain in a minute the standard, using standard as the self-sufficiency standard as a measure of the cost of living, our earnings went up over the decade of 2001 to 2011 by 21%, but the costs of basic needs went up 37%, almost double. Now that's creating a crunch for everybody because their wages just aren't keeping up. So a brief pause here for the self-sufficiency standard, a little explanation. It's a bare bones budget. It's the amount of income required to meet basic needs, including your taxes, at a minimally adequate level. So it includes the basics, things like groceries, but no takeout or restaurant food. So it's not a pizza, not a latte in the budget. It doesn't include public subsidies like food, Sam's Medicaid, subsidized child care, or private subsidies, like when you share housing or get free babysitting from a relative or get some food from the food bank. So this is what it costs you to meet your basic needs, like your rent. If you're going into the market, you're buying child care, you're buying housing, or you're renting housing, paying for child care, and you're paying the full amount. You're not getting any kind of subsidies. So this is what it would cost. Now, I printed this out, so I'm just going to flip through that. So you can look and see what these numbers look like. You don't have to try to copy them down. I gave you copies, and they're on different chairs, so everybody, there's plenty for here. So what happens when people don't have that wage? I don't know if anybody's got one in front of them, but for example, for a single parent in Seattle with a preschool and a school age, she would need about $4,700 a month. So what happens when you don't have that kind of money? The first thing is to do without altogether. Don't go to the doctor or dentist. The second is to use substandard services or products, such as child care by less than adequate providers, housing that is overcrowded or doubled up. And the third is to get assistance, starting with family and friends. Then you go to the churches and community shelters and food pantries, and then public assistance. And studies have shown that people do it in that order. You first exhaust your friends and family, then you try the community, and in the last resort you go for public assistance. That is less available now. One of the other effects of the Great Recession is we cut back on things. We even cut our welfare benefits by 15%, which are incredibly low anyway. But we cut everything, food stamps and not so much, but that doesn't account for a lot of income. And cut back on our health care, barely preserved our programs. So that gives you kind of a sense of the context of what we're dealing with coming out of the Great Recession. Yes, our unemployment is down and there are more jobs. A couple of things are the Affordable Care Act. By extending health care to workers who didn't have access to it or couldn't afford it, or both, it not only adds resources, but also helps in terms of job lock. So if you have a child with a pre-existing condition, you used to have to stay with the employer that provided you health insurance because the next one wasn't going to cover you. Now that's not true. They can't do those kinds of things. And that gives women particularly a lot more flexibility. The second is this Seattle $15 minimum wage law. Although it's gradual in effect, it doesn't happen right away, but it does go in there. It will spread geographically. It also has spillover effects. Some work I'm doing on the state median wage, I estimate about 40% of workers are affected. So when you raise the minimum wage, if somebody else was being paid 15 and you were being paid 14 and you're brought up to 15, well, most employers are going to move that $15 an hour person up. Maybe not a whole dollar, but at least some. So it usually the research shows it goes up to as much as twice the minimum wage. So it's about 40% of workers will be affected by it. And especially good news for women. They are 2/3 of minimum wage workers. And what it does is compress the wage range. It disproportionately helps women workers. Now the challenges. We're stuck at about 77% for the past decade, and this only counts full-time year-round workers, and only about half of women work full-time year-round. Just kind of remind you that when we're talking about the wage gap, we use a figure that takes the wages of full-time year-round workers who are men and women and looks at the ratio between them. That's the wage gap over the last 10 years. So we're not making any progress. So we went from 59 cents on the dollar in the late 60s up to 77%, and then it's just leveled off. So solutions to addressing the pay equity. Most of the progress on the way to 77% was from falling men's wages, not from rising women's wages. We kind of, when we focus on the wage gap and we talk about closing the wage gap, we think that it's a close, we're doing better because more women are working, they're getting more education. It's actually because of that shift from manufacturing to service sector. And remember earlier I was talking about the jobs lost were the mid-wage jobs, and the ones gained were low wage. Well, a lot of men did some shifting in that, and that's one of the so that's one of the dynamics there. Some important advances like the family and medical leave, paid sick days, broader coverage of unemployment insurance, that was part of the stimulus package. It was bribing the states to change their unemployment insurance. Don't show up in terms of the wage ratio. But some approaches haven't been as effective as hoped. And the reason, I think, is the perspective on the underlying issues. So I'm going to finish my talk with a discussion of occupational sex segregation. There's been some progress. So the percentage of doctors and lawyers who are women has risen from about 14% in the early 1980s to 1/3 today for both professions. So that's pretty dramatic change. And it's continuing to change. But in many other fields, not so much. Engineers, for example, have only gone up from 5% to 12%. And at kind of that rate, over that period of time, if you think about that, that's less than a percentage a year. It's gonna be a long time. And construction is stuck. I just saw this report today. I thought it was a good graphic here. The same as 2.6% of construction workers are women, what Rod was talking about. And only 2.6%. It's been 2.6%, and that's the same as 30 years ago. So it hasn't changed. So why occupational desegregation isn't affecting pay equity? As seen above, it's uneven and progress is slow. When Barbara Reskin's research shows, when women enter a male-dominated occupation, it only results in salaries declining as it becomes more and more higher percentage of women. But they are welcome because men are leaving. And they leave an occupation because it's declining in wages, prestige, autonomy. Sales representatives and salesmen are a good example. It used to be that sales representative traveled a lot, they got commissions, the harder you worked, the more you could earn. And then those jobs got brought in-house, the wages went down, no more commissions. Men didn't want the jobs anymore, and so more and more women are now sales representatives, and they're basically retail workers. Not really a great job. Another one is pastors in churches. Used to be a prestigious occupation. It's now much less prestigious. The pay is very low. Men don't want it anymore, so that women come in. So sometimes occupational desegregation doesn't really accomplish what we would hope it would. Harassment continues. As one worker put it from this report from the National Women's Law Center, I love the work, but the hostility and discrimination I face every day on the job shocked me. On the construction site, men don't see you as a plumber or as an electrician. They only see you as a woman who shouldn't be there. They give you a hard time to press you to quit. Women are groped, grabbed, and relentlessly harassed. And there are many quotes to that effect. Now I want to talk about how we view racism and sexism, and I think we need to think about viewing sexism as seriously as we do racism. So this is just a visual of what happened when Donald Sterling made racist comments. Now, when Dianne Feinstein, she's the head of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, got up in the Senate and got very angry because the CIA turned around and spied on the Intelligence Committee, which was trying to do oversight on and do a report on CIA torture. And she made an unusual kind of public statement to the effect of how problematic that was. And this is what happened. The NSA boss said that she was too emotional to judge the CIA torture fairly. Does anybody remember this? Okay, if you did, yeah. I asked my husband to find some pictures, and he didn't remember this at all, which is interesting. Everybody knows about the Clippers, right? Mm-hmm. How many people know about this, and how many people remarked on the sexist treatment of Dianne Feinstein as opposed to the owner of their Clippers? We didn't. It was, he said it, it went past, and nothing was done. Not quite as recently, the killing of Trayvon Martin and the stand your ground law under which his killer was exonerated was deemed to be an example of racism by a number of people. But I'm challenged to think of a single domestic violence murder that has been discussed as an instance of sexism. So we don't put it in the same context when it's sexism. The role of sexism versus racism, versus sexism, I'm supposed to say versus racism. If there are a few African Americans and Hispanics in police and fire departments, we don't say it's because these groups do not choose to become police or firefighters. Rather, we see this as in part, at least, as racism. But if women choose to become childcare workers or social workers, it's not considered to be sexism, but their choice. That is, if they are confined to occupations or excluded from occupations, it's their choice. Too often we implicitly suggest that unless women tackle non-traditional jobs, STEM fields, their low pay is just a result of their choices. We urge them to lean in, and if they don't, well. So some approaches to consider. I'm going to leave you with some thoughts about this. I think we need to revisit comparable worth. with the goal of restructuring salaries to reflect the level of skills, the complexity of work, the responsibilities, et cetera. We need to think more about that, to get back to thinking about jobs in a more objective way and not in the way that a sexist way of thinking has devalued the work that women do. We need to think about restructuring paid leave and other family-friendly policies to incentivize men to take them as well as women. One of the Nordic countries, half of the parental leave has to be taken by men or you lose it. So, and that has made a difference. Not all the men take it, you know. You still can't get some men to do it, but it has to be taken by the father if they're going to get the full parental leave. I believe that not until large numbers of men take advantage of these family-friendly policies and start taking advantage of various flexible benefits will the workplace be structured more equally. I've always thought if men stop lying about why they leave early to go to their kids' soccer game, they're doing it more, but they're still not owning up to it in a way that restructures the workplace and makes it acceptable. Oops. I don't know how to get that out. No, don't do that. I think we need to provide more support to women entering non-traditional fields, drawing from the insights of the women's movement. Support groups. Don't isolate women. I can imagine what it was like to be one of those 6 women out of 260 apprentices. It would have been extremely hard to stick with it, to be able to get through that program without that, without that support. Sanction sexist behavior. Really sanction it. The way we do now, sometimes, racist behavior. We certainly aren't all there yet, but monitor closely sexual harassment and gender-based harassment. So sometimes, like in non-traditional jobs, it's gender-based harassment just because you're a woman. It isn't necessarily sexual in tone. Monitor the hiring promotion opportunities by gender and race, and provide extra support for parents, mothers on jobs such as early or late childcare. So I will end with, that's just where you can get the self-sufficiency standard. You can go online to a place called thecalculator.org, and you can find out what a living wage is for anywhere in Washington state for any family type. And you can go to self-sufficiency-standard.org and get the data, get reports, whatever, and you can contact me at those numbers. And it's just pierce@uw.edu. If you can spell my last name, you've got my address. So. I think I'll stop with that, with the kind of the challenge to think about some ways in which we can think about what is sexist about our occupational structures and how we can address that, and not, and do the kinds of things that will restructure our workplaces, not just change things so they're better for women without forcing men to be a part of that and for the whole structure to change. So I'll stop at that point.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I'm about to be so long.
So much. Dr. Pierce, you want to?
We can just turn this off.
Okay. Okay, so we are now going to hear from our panel. I'll introduce our panelists one by one. As I introduce you, if you'll come up and take your seat. Once I have them all introduced, then they will have opening remarks. So we start with Kristen Rao Finkbinder, who is the Executive Director, CEO, and co-founder of Moms Rising, a national organization with more than 1 million members advocating for family economic security. Moms Rising take on the most critical issues facing women, mothers, and families by educating the public and mobilizing massive grassroots action. Kristen is also an award-winning author and a radio host. Kristen, if you'll take a seat, please. We have Liz Vivian, Executive Director of Women's Funding Alliance, has more than 16 years of community leadership experience in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors. She has worked as a consultant to nonprofits and philanthropic organizations and led global corporate citizenship in the Northwest region for the Boeing Company. She also held positions with the Washington Women's Foundation and the City of Seattle Human Services Department and served as interim executive director of Aradia Women's Health Center. Liz? Erica Singh is known for her knowledge of the human resources industry, her dedication to meeting the needs of her customers, her tenacity, her bias for action, and her exceptional reliability. As a human resources professional with approximately 8 years of experience in organizations with complex leader situations involving performance management, disciplinary actions, and employee relations, she is a results-oriented professional who leads in all areas of diverse recruiting, compensation, benefits, and employee development. Erica, welcome. And last but certainly not least, we have Pat Lemus, who has worked within King County government in a variety of positions. Among those was as the manager for the employment and education programs, and currently as the deputy director for the Department of Community and Human Services. She is also passionate about making sure that equity and social justice issues are front and center for the county, both Big C and Little C, the county and the city. Patricia, if you give our entire panel warm welcome. For the first time in American history, we have 4 generations in the workplace, which means me, my mom, my daughter, and my granddaughters, who are in their 20s, are all in the workplace at the same time. And so we have to look at how we make the workplace flexible enough for employees regardless of their age, particularly women who traditionally have played many roles in their lives. We invented multitasking, and no one can deny that. And so these ladies here are front and center in the war on wage equity, and we'll have them now start with their opening remarks, and then we'll address questions to each of them. So, Kristen, if you'd start, please, with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Shall I come up there or right here?
You can use that mic right there.
Okay,
You guys can,
thank you. There you
yeah, that'll make it easier for you.
Thank you. I have a loud voice, so I'm putting the mic very far away. I'm going to start with a confession. And I like to share a confession to start in my own story, and that is that when I grew up, I thought that women's equality, the fight for women's equality, was over and it was won. And I was wrong, as we all know in this room. And I personally found out that I was wrong when I had my son, who's now 17 years old. But when he was born, he had an immune deficiency. And that meant that he couldn't really be with other kids. He couldn't be in a childcare situation. So I quit my full-time job. And little did I know what that meant. I was very fortunate that my husband had job-linked health care that covered us at the time, and that he also made enough money that we could still have a roof over our heads and food on the table. Extraordinarily fortunate. I was raised by a primarily single mom, and I knew that had the situation, the unplanned situation that happened to me, happened to her, it would have been an outright disaster. I came from a political background. So, of course, one of the first things I did was I asked about numbers. What's going on with moms? What's going on with women in America? And I was shocked. The next thing I did was look for stories. Because right now, although thankfully my son is now healthy and my daughter is healthy too, for too many, motherhood in particular is an economic disaster from which it's very hard to recover. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's a barrier to fair pay and to economic security in the long run. And that's why I co-founded Moms Rising in May of 2006. Moms Rising now has over 1 million members. We have members in every state in the nation, and we have 40,000 members right here in Washington State. Every day at Moms Rising, we hear stories from the front lines of motherhood. And I want to point out 81% of women in America have kids by the time they're 44. So this is the majority of women are experiencing these issues. Christina shared, quote, "Searching for an apartment brought me face to face with discrimination. Landlords repeatedly hung up on me when I mentioned I had a toddler. They didn't even talk to me," end quote. Cynthia shared, "I worked for an advertising firm. At one event, it was really obvious how many women worked for the ED, so I asked him why. He said, because I can pay them less." She said, "I was 23 and shocked. I hadn't yet learned I was less valuable than a man," end quote. Barbara came forward to share, "I didn't have access to paid sick days, so I had to postpone taking my kids to the doctor, and one time this resulted in my daughter having a serious untreated ear infection that harmed her hearing," end quote. I want to point out that although we have passed paid sick days in the city of Seattle, 80% of workers, low-wage workers across the country don't have access to a single paid sick day, and 40% of private sector workers don't. The drumbeat of stories builds. Christina shared, quote, "I'm frustrated that our child care costs more than our mortgage and our car payments combined," end quote. Side note, child care now costs more than college in most states in our nation. These stories aren't isolated incidents. As I said, 81% of women do have children by the time they're 44 years old, and all are facing a maternal wall. I'm going to share a little bit about what that wall looks like. Women without children, according to one study, make 90 cents to a man's dollar. Moms make 73 cents to a man's dollar. Single moms, of which 41% of births are to single moms, make about 60 cents to a man's dollar. And women of color are making as low as 44 cents to a man's dollar. This is an absurd situation. We know something very important that I want everybody to remember when they leave this room, and that's that motherhood is now a greater predictor of wage and hiring discrimination than gender. This is a significant issue. We know we can do better. We know that solutions are possible, that countries with family economic security policies in place, like you just heard about, like access to paid family leave that men and women can take, like access to paid sick days that men and women can take, like access to affordable childcare, actually have lower wage gaps between moms and non-moms and between women and men. We also know that pay transparency policies like the Paycheck Fairness Act and like the executive order that the president just signed can also do significant forward movement in terms of shining daylight on that subconscious discrimination that is impacting most women in the United States of America. We know that we can raise all boats. We know that flexible work options, for example, increase employee retention and employee performance, boosting the business's bottom lines and offering more women and men the ability to have a real life at home, to raise thriving kids, and to thrive economically. We know that there are solutions. We also know that when we come together, we have the power to get to those solutions. So before I turn it over to Liz, I just want to do a quick thing, because you've been sitting a little while, and that is a demonstration of our power. So would everyone who is a mom just do a little wiggle, stand. Want to do a little wiggle? Now everybody who has ever had a mother at any point in their life, do a little wiggle, stand. All right, we can sit down now. But the thing that I've learned working at Moms Rising is that our stories are powerful. Our life experiences are powerful. We can change the way our nation works. We can change the way our city works. Look what happened in the city of Seattle with paid sick days. Look what happened with the president signing the executive order on pay transparency. We are moving our nation forward, but we are not anywhere near done yet. So it's going to take the work of each and every person in this room and each and every person we know outside of this room to continue moving forward. And we know we can do it. I want to close with a final story. A Moms Rising member, Dawn, shared, "When my child recently was approved for health insurance, I asked the agent, 'Do you mean that if my son needs another surgery, it's covered?' 'Yes,' the agent said. 'We can't exclude conditions any longer due to the Affordable Care Act.'" That's a change we all made. Thank you.
Liz?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Well, my name is Liz Vivian. I work at the Women's Funding Alliance, and we have a vision that all women and girls have the opportunity to live, lead, and thrive. And by all, I mean all. I don't mean that it is the four of us up here sort of helping some women over there, or even all of us in the room that are working to help other women. I mean that all of us literally can improve our lives. So we mean all women and girls have the opportunity to live, lead, and thrive. Our mission is to advance leadership and economic opportunity for women and girls in Washington State. This is absolutely critical work that we do, and Moms Rising is a partner of ours, and we take a lot of what they're doing nationally and lead that work here in Washington State in partnership with a whole host of other philanthropic, public, private, nonprofit organizations. So what has us fired up at Women's Funding Alliance right now is really a number of really critical, important gender gaps. One is about leadership. Washington State lost its #1 spot for women in the state legislature. We're now at 33%. The #1 spot was 40%, right? So that was not even good enough, and yet we're going in the wrong direction. We have not enough women serving in leadership across all sectors, the nonprofit, in corporate, and also in appointed positions. And I would say, actually, the larger gap around elected office and appointed positions is that the the women who are serving are largely white. We don't have enough women of color that are in appointed or elected positions in Washington state. We're also really fired up about economic opportunity for women in Washington. We know the data about the wage gap locally. It's even worse than the 77% nationally, right? In Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue area, it's 73 cents on the dollar. And again, that's for white women compared to all men. So for women of color, it's worse. And as we heard from Kristen, for moms, it's even larger. For moms of color, it's even larger. We did some research pre-recession and post-recession and found that in Washington state, 100,000 more women and girls live in poverty than they did pre-recession. Diana points to a lot of the reasons why. I graduated from Franklin High School, and me too. Did you? Yay. What? Sorry. Yes. And I went back to high school. We're a lot of Quaker pride in this town. I went back to high school for the career day to have a chance to talk to a group of juniors about what I do. And they were shocked when I talked about the gender wage gap. And then one of them gave me the best softball question ever. He said, well, okay, so you work for a nonprofit. Like, you're not really making anything or selling anything. So, like, how do you get money? And I was like, oh, wow, let's talk about that. Okay, so we're not actually making the water bottle or your backpack, but we actually are selling a vision of a better world. And here's what that means. So if we close that wage gap, that means $16,000 more for your family every year. Think about your mom, think about your sisters, your aunties, your daughters that you don't yet have. What would you and your family do with $16,000 a year? And collectively, what would we do with $7.8 billion? We would lift our families out of poverty, we would start businesses, we would run for office. We would literally change the world with that kind of money. So this, the opportunity to close the wage gap is deep and long-lasting. They all looked at me like, wow. And I said, so every day that's what I sell, and people buy it. That's how we raise money. This is what people want to be part of. And how exciting is that? So I'm excited to talk more about solutions and my experience with the Seattle Chamber and the City of Seattle's gender wage initiatives as we go on. And I'll pass it to you, Erica.
Thank you. So my world is more around recruitment in the HR realm and working in the different organizations as I recruit individuals into different opportunities. A lot of them talk about flexible opportunities. What are the benefits? I'm coming from a situation, well, I would say I'm giving examples of candidates as I speak to. They're looking to kind of come into a slower pace where there's an employer that's going to give them the opportunity to be with their children and to be able to enjoy their family instead of just working just to make ends meet. A lot of the employees that we do have in place are engaged, but would be more engaged if we allow them to have those flexibilities. We recently did a survey. I don't know if any of you know about Gallup, but it's an engagement survey in employers to assess how folks are feeling in their work environments. And we got a good assessment around engagement of how are they feeling in the workplace, and we did a little bit more diving in and saying, what is it that would make you more engaged? Maybe about 70% of the female population recommended being able to telecommute. The cost of childcare, I can speak on behalf of myself. I question having a second child because I can't afford the first one that I have. I'm struggling to pay the preschool premiums, the tuition for after school and before programs. And I'm afraid if I have the next child, will I be able to make the ends meet, or do I need to have subsidized, childcare or food stamps as an option? And that's not engaging at all. And I think the wage piece is very important as well. I take pride in making sure we're equitable when I do hire folks into the organization. I have crucial conversations with the hiring managers and letting them know that we need to look at skills and knowledge versus who you like and who you think is a high potential. Again, people that are doing the work and have been there for several years, either we bring them up to the person that you're bringing in a higher wage, or you bring that person down to where that person is supposed to be making. You allow that person to make the decision on if this is a good fit for them or not. So it's a fair playing field for everyone, and so everyone is engaged in that morale as well. We have had a lot of turnover based on folks coming in higher in a wage scale and someone that's been doing the work. We want to make sure we retain our stellar employees, and I would hate to see more folks leave because of those issues. But again, I'm passionate about this, and I hope I can support any of the work that's happening on this.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah.
Pat?
Thank you. So my world is King County, and I feel very fortunate to be part of the King County workforce. Both Rhonda and Councilmember Dombowski, stole a little bit of my thunder. So we are very fortunate to be at that 91.1% of women earning what men earn here in King County. And I'm actually going to steal a line from Liz. She said, the vision of a better world. So the county actually has a vision for a better King County. And Rhonda mentioned our strategic plan. And the other one is our equity and social justice work that we've done here in the county. And a lot of the focus is on fair and just principles. And in our King County strategic plan, it says that fair and just, that we serve all residents of King County by promoting fairness and opportunity and eliminating inequities. And I actually work for the Department of Community and Human Services. And in that department, we have 3 different divisions, and I am working for the Community Services Division. And actually, I want to have a shout out to Dr. Pierce. We actually use your calculator for our employment programs, and we use the self-sufficiency indicator and look at living wage jobs. So I seen your name. Now I had the pleasure of. Now there you go. So we, so that's separate. Let me see. I got to get back to where I was going here. So in the Department of Community and Human Services, we have a equity and social justice leadership team, and we have a workforce equity committee that right now is primarily working on issues around race. But we do have an opportunity to also include gender and pay equity and friendly working environments. It was, like I said, we originally were thinking mostly about race, but it certainly is something that we could add. We've done a really good, analysis of our department, including all of the divisions, where we are as far as, here's the visual. So we've done work around identifying race, identifying women. What we haven't done is the pay equity, but that's fairly easy to do, and we are working on this data right now. So I actually was just talking to the analyst that was doing the analysis. So we're going to add wage equity to see how we are in the Department of Community and Human Services. We are excited to be part of this panel. We have, although at 99.1, there is still work to be done, and I am really interested to see what our department is doing around wage equity, and once we get those results, to see what we can do to improve that.
The board was very aggressive in having Dr. Pierce and this great panel here at the same. We could have had an hour for both of you guys. So what we're going to do, because we do want to stay on time, I want to jump to solutions. So if you could scooch that mic back down to Liz and have her start identifying some of the solutions that your organization has identified, and then Kristen, because Kristen I know is speaking about solutions she's come up with, and let's give the audience some things that they can think about as they move forward in working towards closing the gap.
Sure. So a couple of things seem really important to say here at the county around what solutions might look like. The city of Boston launched a really ambitious 100% talent initiative to close the gender wage gap in Boston. Now, the Seattle metropolitan area ranks 50 out of the 50 largest metropolitan areas, so their wage gap is much smaller. They have a large population of women and a large population of very educated women. Their initiative is really centered around 33 things that public and private companies can do to close the gender wage gap. More than 50 companies have signed on. And we've started, Women's Funding Alliance has started talking about how we can replicate this work here locally. I think we don't actually need to reinvent the wheel, and whether we choose to offer all 33 options or only 25 actually makes sense here, we can have that conversation locally. But what I love about it is that it's a public-private partnership that is based on sound research, and it incorporates both what companies can do internally and public policies that would lift up all families. So I think it's a really unique opportunity. We'll be bringing people out to start talking with people locally, and look forward to working with everybody at the county around that. And the second thing I would say is, as part of the City of Seattle's Gender Equity Task Force, our number one recommendation was really about comparable worth. So it's part of what Diana talked about, that for centuries we have undervalued women's work. So when somebody made the original pay scale, they had parking attendants at one level and childcare workers at a lower level. It was because women were seen as sort of the extra money in the family, which we know is no longer the case. And it's a complicated and expensive process to really go through and look at what does this job contribute overall, and how do we reclassify pay scales that starts to bring equality. But that's a key step.
Okay,
So those are two things.
Thank you. I want to give like a whole book. I'm just going to give a couple though. One of the first is actually education about subconscious discrimination. I want to share a little study with you. Cornell University study using equal resumes and job experiences. So completely equal. The bio section was a little bit different. No person present who was either leaning in or leaning out, who was either confident or not. I don't know if you've been following some of this blame game about why women are getting paid less. We're not leaning in enough. Not true. We're not being, kind of out there enough and confident enough. Totally not true. So none of that is in play because we're talking about paper here. And so when we have two pieces of paper, and one is marked as a mom and the other one is marked as not a mom, again, equal resumes and job experiences, moms are hired 80% less of the time and offered $11,000 lower starting salaries. Dads are offered $6,000 more. This is a significant problem, and I'm very sad to say that these are recent studies, and the study data has been getting worse over time. It was actually way more than 80% of the time less likely to be hired the last time the study was done. So educating people about the subconscious discrimination that's going on around us is highly important, because I can pretty much guarantee you that hopefully none of the people who are making those hiring decisions did it on purpose, right? So it's educating people about subconscious discrimination, number one. Pay transparency, really important. We're seeing that in the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is moving through Congress. It's having its fits and starts. We saw it in the executive order that impacted 26 million people because it impacts anybody getting federal contracting funds. We can also do that here in King County. And why that's important is we want apples to apples comparisons. Again, we're getting rid of the blame game. We want apples to apples comparisons about jobs. Unfortunately, the New York Times reported recently that the biggest wage disparities are now within the same job category. So, for example, female surgeons are making much less than male surgeons. Female accountants, much less than male accountants. Very significant problem. Pay transparency is critical. Also, offering flexible work options, very important. Allowing men and women that is very important. And even outside of King County, within King County, actually access to paid family leave is highly important. Only 12% of employees in the United States of America have access to paid family leave, despite the fact that this policy is the norm in over 177 countries, has been proven to decrease taxpayer dollars going into families in the long run, and has been proven also to have moms back in the labor force sooner. The last but far from least area that is the most important is your voice. Again, I have seen and had my mind blown over and over again about the power of each of our voices, sharing each of our stories, sharing each of our experiences with often clueless elected leaders. I will now say I've also had my mind blown with the cluelessness that's out there. Many people, again, are not discriminating against women and moms on purpose. So sharing our stories, sharing our experiences, and importantly, sharing that when this many people are having the exact same problem at the exact same time, we have a structural issue and not an epidemic of personal failings, can move legislation at the city, state, and federal level, and I've seen it done again and again. So those are my answers. I have, 800 more, but I'll save them for later.
And she will be here after, so you can get at least another 600 from her. Erica, if you want to give us your closing comments and solutions.
Sure. And again, working in HR, I think just as an employer is understanding what your staff or employees want and making an effort to understand what is going to make them engage, what is it that they need that means flexible work life, and trying to at least pilot it or try to give it a try and see what the results are, and making a good effort around that would be a good thing. Again, everything that you guys are saying I agree to, but I think just for immediate things, if you can, try to do surveys to see what folks need. As for pay, be cognitive of the skills and the value that this person's bringing versus their race, their sex, all the other stuff, and who you like and who you may not like, and just be fair to the people that are currently there too. If they're not making as much as the next person coming in, try to bring them up as you can, and just be fair around the salary. Again, engagement is key. Productivity is going to be key as long as you treat everybody equal. I think that's what I can say.
And Pat, you're working a lot with hiring practices.
Yes, so
Closing remarks.
Yes,
and
so
solutions.
a couple of things, though. That poster over there that is on that wall that talks about the determinants of equity, right there, yes. So one of the determinants of equity that King County is focusing on is on family wage jobs and job training. So it is something that we in King County are working to promote. Inside King County, or as an employee of King County, we are very fortunate to have, alternative work schedules. We have telecommuting opportunities. We have part-time jobs. As Rhonda mentioned, if we work 20 hours a week, you get full medical. We have family medical leave and leave acts, and we also have the employee assistance program. So that's why I said earlier that I'm very fortunate to be part of the county workforce. In the Department of Community and Human Services, we are going to focus on gender. We had, like I said, our original focus had been on race, but so now we'll add gender to it in the work that we're doing, and we will look at wage equity. We will look at our hiring practices in the department and see where we can make some improvements in that area. I'm well aware of the part-time work and but I don't see a lot of job sharing. So I'm curious. So I'm gonna look and see where the county stands there with our HR people, and see if we can have some opportunities to do that in our department.
Thank you so much. The time went by so quickly, but we did receive so much information. We thank you, ladies, so much. Dr. Pierce, we thank you so much for your insight. Like I said, they will be around if we have individual questions. And with that, I want to turn the meeting back over to our co-chair, Lisa, for closing. Let's give our panel and Dr. Pierce a warm round of applause.
Okay, it's 1 minute to 7. Thank you so much for everybody for being here. It was very informative, lots to learn, very exciting. So again, thank you everybody for being here. Rhonda Berry, Dr. Pierce, and the distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.